On this episode of Hot Rod Hoarders, I'm taking you on a tour of Tellico Mountain Motors, an old school junkyard nestled in the hills of East Tennessee. It's full of treasure. Let's go take a look. This place has been around for a long time. In fact, it started in 1972 and it grew for several years, decades even, until really the junkyard side of the business kind of fizzled out in the mid-90s. And that's when the owner actually created a towing service. The junkyard kind of went on the back burner, but they do a really special thing that allowed us some access to go check this place out. They actually open the junkyard up on select Saturday mornings from 9 a.m. until noon. Now, this isn't every Saturday morning. It's kind of a whenever they feel like it type of thing, but it's kind of an exclusive chance to go check out this place. And people actively go and shop there. They go find parts for the project cars because this place is packed with 60s, 70s, and 80s parts. I mean, we're not talking about just a field with a bunch of cars in it. This is woods on the side of a mountain that is packed with, I don't even know how many, but I'm guessing it's in the thousands of cars. We spent a couple hours. We really didn't have a whole lot of time because they only open for a few hours each week. So the plan for this is to show you everything that we saw on this trip, and then we're going to go back and we're going to see more because we only saw a fraction of this property. And some of it is absolutely not accessible. I'm talking about so thick that you would really just have to bring a machete or some type of saw or something to even get to some of these cars. I took my brother with me. We enjoyed some time together because this adventure was a little too intense for Carly. I didn't want her getting out here and getting snake bit or anything like that. You know, I didn't want to drag her along to something quite so treacherous, and I actually had no idea it was this intense. So, you know, once we got there and we got kind of acclimated, we had a good time and it was a lot of fun, and we definitely want to come back and see some more of this place. So we make our way up the hills, and I mean, we're talking about a steep incline going up these pretty narrow paths with cars on both sides of us. Initially saw some stuff that really wasn't all that interesting to us, but then I ended up peeling off into one of these sections and found some really cool stuff. So the first thing that I saw was this second generation Pontiac Firebird. You'll see that it's got a chrome bumper on the back. That shows us that it's a pretty early second generation car. Then we've got an old school Buick station wagon, and this thing has been kind of butchered up. Obviously somebody's cut the thing up for some parts, but it has a ton of parts left over. Tons of trim pieces, emblems, things like that, that you know, you can't order this type of stuff from Summit or from any of the parts places. So seeing that this thing isn't completely scavenged is pretty crazy. From there, we keep making our way deeper into the woods. We find a 340 Plymouth Duster, and this thing is fairly complete. I mean, it's had lots of parts robbed off of it, but you know, when you're looking at it, it still looks like a car. It's still got the yellow paint on it, still got the stripes on it with the 340 markings on the back. This is a really cool looking car considering it's sat outside for decades. Next is a 55 Chevrolet. This is a four-door sedan. And you know, you can't tell much about it because it's just rotting into the ground. But if you peek inside of here, you'll see that it's got some old vintage upholstery. And this isn't the factory upholstery. This is something somebody has made. This is, you know, people call it rolled and pleated or tuck and roll. You know, this is a real early style of custom upholstery, you know, more than likely from the 60s. As we make our way further down the trail, we see a 67 or 68 Mustang Coupe. Then we got a little Pinto, and then a 1967 Camaro. Now this car looks kind of okay from the passenger side, but as we make our way around to the driver's side, it's hurt pretty bad. And it has been scavenged for lots of parts. There's not really anything usable left on this thing. And I went around here up to the firewall to see if I could kind of get an idea of what this car was originally, but somebody has obviously popped that cowl tag off of there. As we look around, we see that we cannot go very much further unless we were really adventurous or unless we brought a machete or some type of weed eater or something to get back in further into this collection, because as you can see, it is thick back through here. So I finally made my way back to the main trail. got out of that little section of cars and made our way to the next section of cars, which didn't take very long. Got down to a little trail area where I could get down and take a closer look, and I immediately found something that got my attention. It's a 1965 Mercury Comet, and this thing's got some major drag racing flavor. The first thing I noticed are the radius wheel openings out back. These things originally had some pretty short wheel openings, and people would just hack these things out to put some big slicks or something on the back of it. And then I looked inside and I saw that the transmission tunnel was hacked up. Obviously they've changed transmissions or shifters or something and made that modification. Then I also saw that the hood had a hole cut out in it. It's got hood pins. And then under the hood, I see that the shock towers, which are the limiting factor for doing an engine swap on this type of car, they've been massaged pretty heavily to make more room. So this thing could have had a big block Chevy, could have had a FE-based Ford motor. Who knows what this thing had in it? And that's, you know, it's kind of a mystery. I don't know anything about this car. There's no markings on it anywhere, but I still love this kind of stuff. Any kind of old drag car or race car in general gets me excited. And I hung around this one for a little while and finally realized that I needed to make the most of my time, so I got back out on the trail to go check out some more cars. As I finished up with my little race car obsession, I spun around and you can see some of the other cars that are kind of on this back row. There's some four-door sedans, even some two-door sedans like this Ford. It's still got paint on it, you know. This thing is probably rotten underneath, but from the top side right here, it looks pretty cool. Then we've got a AMC Spirit, which I love these little cars. They're small, lightweight, rear-wheel drive cars that AMC built back in the day. Then it looks like we've got a Plymouth Valiant station wagon. Again, this thing is very complete. Probably not something you'd want to build, but it looks like it's all there. As we made our way around, I noticed a few 70 to 72 Chevelles, some four doors, some two doors, you know, just a mixture of old Chevelles, several Novas, you know, lots of the different variants of that Nova platform, you know, from the Buick, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, all those lines are covered. Tons of those cars scattered out through here. Those are good junkyard material because people didn't appreciate those cars very much back in the day. In this general area, there's not a ton of cars stacked on top of each other. We've got one right here that's a Mustang 2 sitting up on top of a couple of what look to be Japanese cars from the early 80s. And then we've got an Olds Cutlass here, really neat looking car. We saw quite a few 70s Dodge Chargers like 1972 and up. Obviously these things don't get quite as much love as the earlier ones, but they're really coming on strong because they're still somewhat affordable and you can still put a big old motor in there and go fast and have fun. Coming around the bend, we see some kind of old school Lincoln. Not really sure what year this would have been. I'm guessing maybe early 70s. I really don't know, but it's got suicide doors on the back. That's always a cool thing. But this thing is absolutely smashed. I don't know what it hit or what hit it, but it is garbage. But if you look at this thing, the window's open, the door's open, and this front seat is absolutely perfect. It looks like you could just wipe the dirt off of it, spray a little bit of Armor All or something on it, and it'd be good to go. We saw lots of other cool stuff. We had to kind of find our way on this little path to see it, but inside of there we saw a really cool AMC Marlin. You never see these things. I mean, you might see one at a cruise-in or something like that, but just out here in the wild, I mean, you never see an AMC Marlin in a junkyard. Moving on through the path, we see a 59 Chevy four-door and then a 70 Mustang fastback. Now, this car, I know in my heart that this is somebody's hot rod because from a distance, I saw that it had shackles on the back, on the leaf springs, and I see that this thing has been painted several times. I see orange, I see red, I see blue. You know, who knows how many times this thing was painted and redone and revitalized, and who knows how many motors it had in it. Speaking of which, it's still got an engine in it. Parts have been taken here and there, but when you see a classic, a 70 Mustang fastback, it's kind of cool. It's surreal to see a car like this surrounded by so many other junk cars. The next thing that caught my attention was an early second generation Camaro. I can't tell what year it is, but we're looking at like 1970 through 1973. It's the kind with the round tail lights and the chrome bumpers. And you know, this thing is just absolute trash and it's just sitting really low and rusty and bad. I see those fender flares on the back. Again, little hot rod details like that just jump out at me, and I love seeing this kind of stuff. Another interesting car is this 1975 Plymouth Duster. Now, I don't claim to be a Mopar expert, but I just always call this Petty Blue. Another Duster that got my attention was this early one. So this one, judging by the tail lights, is either 1970 or 71. And look how solid this thing is. I mean, this looks like it's a buildable car. This is a slant six car. This thing's got a cool look. Again, you got that cool stripe down the side. Mopar had the coolest color and stripe combinations back in the day. One of the cars that was surprisingly complete is this big Pontiac Bonneville. Now, these cars are huge, and they have lots of special parts on them. Of course, this is based off of the Impala frame, but the body and trim and all that kind of stuff, it has some pretty specific parts and pieces. One thing that's specific to Pontiac are these 8-lug wheels. This is a pretty desirable item, and I'm surprised somebody hasn't come and got them yet. You don't see too many convertibles in junkyards, especially from the early 60s, and this 62 Ford convertible, which they call a Sunliner, is a pretty rare piece. Around the corner from it is a Jetstar 88 with a mid to late 60s Bel Air sitting right up on top of it. Here's another cool one. This one I'm pretty sure has some drag racing history. Maybe it was a hopped up street car. It's kind of hard to tell, but it's an early Plymouth Barracuda. You've got radius quarters, and then up front I'm seeing some big old cutout holes, which I'm assuming were for headers to poke through. Now, I don't know for sure. I don't know any history on this car, but just judging by those couple of things, and then I also see a Moroso Performance decal on the deck lid. So who knows? Don't know what engine this thing might have run. Don't know any of its story, but it is super cool. Moving on up the hill, there's a Mercury Cyclone. At least that's what it says on the quarter panel. I know these cars can be replicated or duplicated, so there's a chance that this is a clone. I'm not really sure how to tell the difference, and I didn't want to spend the time to really dig in that deep on it because we had a lot more cars to look at. And that includes this orange 73 or 4 Nova, but then in the background is a red two-door hardtop Chevelle. Looks like a 71 or 2, sitting right up on top of an old C10 truck. And the thing that really jumped out to me was those 2 white bucket seats that are still sitting up in there. Then we saw several International Scouts, and I found that interesting because, we did see one K5 Blazer that was really stripped out. Although it still had a few usable parts on it, it was mostly stripped. You don't see those things out like this very often, but as we made our way around, we saw tons of International Scouts. We saw some that didn't have a roof, some that had the old hardtop, some that had the different style hardtop. I don't know what year that changed, but different variety of International Scouts. And then we saw one that really got my attention, and you can see lettered on the side of it. It says Mud Runner. It's got the guys' names lettered on it. And then it even says lettering by McGurdy. So cool that all that lettering is still there. And you can see underneath of this thing, they have lifted this thing dramatically. So it probably had some really big tires on it, maybe even like tractor tires. I'm not sure, but you can see those hubs are huge. These are some big axles. And then the roll cage on this thing is really scary. Small tubing, looks like maybe it was made out of 1 7/8" exhaust tubing or 1.5 inches. I don't know, something small and sketchy. I love the lettering on this thing. I love the history. I don't know the history, but it's got some. Some of the paths on this hillside kind of get narrow and they get a little bit more treacherous. I got a little closer look at a few cars there, nothing really spectacular that jumped out at me, but I just tried to capture how steep this hillside was. Like you can see this car sitting up here, kind of on this flat spot a little bit, and then the cars that just roll off the edge of the bank. Kind of crazy how much the terrain changes as you make your way around this place. But that was one of the most dramatic areas that we saw. One of the most complete cars we saw in our adventure was this 1960 Pontiac Bonneville 4-door. Now this thing has so much good usable trim on it. The windows are great, the trim, the bumpers. This looks like a totally buildable project, even though it's been sitting out in the woods for decades. And then we see kind of up on the hill, another place that's hard to get to, a 61 Chevy 4-door hardtop, and then a few other cars kind of scattered around on the top of the hill. And then as we turn around, we see the bottom of the hill, there's cars stacked in here like crazy. There's all sorts of stuff just pushed down the hillside, stacked on top of each other. And I mean, you can just look at this stack and see, you know, there's some junk in here. There's some 80s stuff that doesn't really matter, but kind of scattered throughout the stack, there is some cool stuff in the mix. So like I mentioned earlier, this place is only open for 3 hours on Saturday. So our time was running close. We needed to get back down to our starting point. So we started making our way down the hill, and we started looking around kind of some areas that we've already covered. So that gives us a chance to look a little deeper, look a little further. And in this one fenced off area, I see kind of a barn or shed, and it's got a bunch of parts just stacked in there. And one thing that just jumps out to me is an early Corvette door. And so this is probably like a 58 through 61 Corvette door, judging by the trim. And so I just had to ask the guy. He said it's not for sale, but it was bought at a yard sale for $15 many years ago, and it's been sitting right there ever since. Another cool thing that I saw just as we were getting ready to get out of the junkyard was this pair of old school chrome steel slotted wheels. They look like 15 by 10s. They've got some old raised white letter tires on them. But as I'm just kind of eyeballing those wheels, I see a chrome valve cover sticking up. It's a big block Chevy that's turned over kind of on its side. I don't know anything about it. It's really hard to get to, but I'm pretty sure that next time we come over here, I'm going to try to investigate and see what this engine is. So definitely stay tuned, because we're going to keep on coming back and seeing more and discovering more from this giant junkyard. We're talking thousands of cars across no telling how many acres. And you know, it's all pretty rough terrain. There's some that's absolutely not accessible, but we're going to do our very best to show you everything that we can see in this giant collection of cars and parts. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video, and feel free to drop a comment down below. Take a walk with us to check out even more stuff from Tellico Mountain Motors. Thank you for watching.